Yeah, girl, I'd climb a tree too if I had to put up with him. Hello everyone, I hope that you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. My name is Emily, and this is another episode of If the Slipper Fits, the series where I discuss just about any version of the Cinderella fairy tale that I can get my hands on. Since we recently talked about the version of the tale that was collected by the Grimm brothers, I thought this episode would be a good excuse to see that version in action. So today we're taking a look at a German TV movie from 1989, simply titled Aschenputtel. Because I'm not German, and I also don't read German, there's not going to be a whole lot of commentary that I can really make about the cultural context or impact this film had. But if any of you out there can educate me, then please put something in the comments. I will be happy to learn. I can tell you that this film was released on Christmas Day, 1989, which was actually a little over a month after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And about a year later, Germany would be reunified as a single country. So the fact that the producers wanted to make a film with a very nostalgic and familiar story around this time when big changes were happening feels like it may have been intentional. I can also tell you that it was not easy to find a version of this film with English subtitles, so I had to watch it dubbed. And for that reason, I don't think it would necessarily be fair of me to really comment on anybody's acting ability in particular, since I'm not really getting a single whole display of that one way or the other. With all of those disclaimers out of the way, let's get right to it. As usual, I'm going to start with a brief synopsis of the story just so that we're all on the same page, and then we will come back and get into all of the details. We open with Cinderella and her parents out enjoying a picnic. Her mother is fighting off a mysterious cough, and when it gets worse, she tells Cinderella to always be good and patient, and she will be with her even in death. The mother passes away off screen, and shortly after, the father announces that he is going to be married again. He says the woman has 2 daughters of her own, which he hopes will make Cinderella happy since she will have some friends to live with. The stepmother and stepsisters arrive at the house and instantly hog all of the father's attention away from Cinderella. She asks her father to take her with him on his next business trip, saying she feels lonely, but the stepmother makes her stay at home, and she and the stepsisters all immediately start forcing her to do all of the housework and basically caring to their every whim. The older stepsister even takes over her bedroom, and they force her out of her dress, claiming it's too nice for her to work in. I will note this is when they actually start calling her Cinderella as a mocking nickname. The mother or father never referred to her by any other specific name. I've just been calling her that for sake of ease. She works hard until her father returns home, and the stepmother lies to explain why Cinderella looks so disheveled, and says that her old pair of shoes fell apart, which is why she's barefoot. The father then takes Cinderella into town so she can get whatever new shoes she wants, but the stepmother follows them and tells the cobbler they were only wanting a pair of wooden shoes. The father goes out on another business trip, and the stepsisters ask him for new dresses, while Cinderella asks for the first branch that touches his hat on his way back. Flyers are posted around town announcing a royal celebration, including 3 nights of balls where any young maidens are invited, so that the prince may find himself a wife. Cinderella is forced into helping her stepsisters get ready and tells the stepmother that she wants to go too, but the stepmother just laughs it off because she would be an embarrassment. The father returns with the new dresses and the twig, which Cinderella plants at her mother's grave, and it quickly grows into a tree. She asks again if the stepmother will let her go to the ball, but the stepmother says that she needs to sort a bag of lentils before she'll be allowed to go. The family's doves fly in and sort all of the lentils for her, but before she can even show that she's finished, they ride off without her. She goes to the grave, and she hears her mother's voice telling her that the tree will grant what she wishes, but the magic will only last until midnight. She wishes to see the prince, and her mother's voice tells her to go to the dovecote, where she briefly gets superhuman vision so she can watch the ball from afar. The father finds Cinderella out at the grave the next morning, and tells her it's perfectly okay with him if she wants to go to the ball. She does hold this over her stepsisters' heads for a brief moment, but the stepmother insists that she can only go after she finishes her chores, which means even more lentils to sort. Actually, she calls them peas this time, even though they look the exact same, so I don't know. Cinderella calls them the doves again, but the family rides off before they're even finished. She hears her mother's voice again and goes to ask the tree for a dress. A coach and horses also appear to take her to the ball. When she arrives, her coachman tells the footman that she is a princess, and she is announced as the Princess of Incognito. The prince is immediately taken with her and asks her to dance, and they have a brief but lovely time. She runs off as soon as the clock starts ringing, but the prince, his jester, and some guards ride off after her. She climbs up a pear tree to try and avoid the guards, and they ask her father to cut it down since they suspect someone is hiding there. But she sneaks back inside before it comes down, and the prince leaves quite confused. The next night, Cinderella doesn't even ask if she can go to the ball, only if the stepmother has any chores for her. But the stepmother fakes her out by giving her a bag of lentils that's already been sorted and then locking her in the kitchen. But one of the doves manages to bring back the key so Cinderella can escape. All of the other maidens arrive to the ball in silver dresses, trying to look like she did the previous night, but they're a little put out when she arrives in a gold dress instead. The prince makes it pretty clear that he intends to marry Cinderella, but she's having second thoughts because he doesn't know who she really is. She leaves the ball, but loses one of her golden shoes in some tar that was spread on the castle stairs, and asks the tree to take back the dress and the coach. The next morning, the stepmother bursts in with news that the prince has declared whomever is able to fit the shoe that was left behind will become his bride. Cinderella goes to hide in the dovecote while her stepsisters try on the shoe. When it won't fit the first one, the stepmother gives her a knife and tells her to cut off her heel, which she does. But the doves nearby point out the blood coming from the shoe. The same happens with the other stepsister. When the prince asks if there are any other ladies who live at the house, the stepmother reluctantly mentions Cinderella and he demands to see her. The father starts to chop down the dovecote because they suspect that's where she's hiding, but she shows herself. The prince seems to automatically know that she's the one he's looking for, but the stepmother demands that she still needs to try on the shoe, which of course fits. The whole town celebrates as she is taken back to the palace, and the stepmother and stepsisters do their best to look happy and kiss up to her. I'll start off by saying this film is very slow-paced. It runs just about an hour and a half, but it really doesn't try to add too much on top of what the Grimm brothers already wrote, so they have to kind of stretch things out. There's also not a whole lot of music either, which can feel kind of awkward. That said, it somehow never gets to the point where it's so slow-paced that it's boring, at least not for me. It's comfortable with itself. It's not in a hurry to do anything. It'll get there when it gets there. I guess if I'm going to deal with slow pacing, I'd rather deal with it throughout rather than having some good pacing and some bad. Looking at you, Clash of the Titans. Even the little bits they do add for the film never seem to go anywhere or become significant in the story. The one thing I would say they expand upon is the idea that the spirit of Cinderella's mother is somehow tied to the tree. In the Grimm's text, it's definitely implied, but it's never explicitly stated. Here, they flat out have the disembodied voice of Cinderella's mother telling her exactly what she needs to do to progress the story. And even though this is a pretty direct adaptation of the Grimm version, there are certain elements they included which are only present in the French version from Charles Perrault, such as the midnight curfew and an actual coach for Cinderella to ride in. I did also enjoy the dove bringing Cinderella the key when she got locked in the kitchen, since it reminded me of a certain pair of mice. And you also may have noticed one significant element from the Grimms that didn't make it into this film. Nobody gets their eyes pecked out. Can't say I'm too upset about that. And they still keep the foot sashimi, but you never actually see anything since this is clearly meant to be family friendly. But sometimes this film does things that are just weird. For example, multiple instances of breaking the fourth wall. When Cinderella is on her way to the cobbler, there is a lady who is literally reading the story of Cinderella out loud to her kids. And it's not just like a cute one-liner, like she literally catches us up to the current point of the story that we're in.
A year after the woman's death, the father married again. His new wife had 2 daughters. They were both mean and wicked. And the poor stepchild was mistreated and unhappy.
And this lady never comes back like an unintentional narrator or anything, so I don't know why they let her go on for so long. There's also times where characters look directly at the camera. I could not for the life of me tell you why. It's not everybody, but it's also not just restricted to one character, so it feels really off and random and just weird. They don't talk to the camera, they just look at it. I guess it's meant to be funny, but also the character who feels like does it the most is the stepmother, so I really got nothing. Speaking of things that I don't understand about this film, the cobbler. Okay, hear me out. The cobbler that Cinderella meets when her father takes her shoe shopping is clearly very eccentric. The actor is giving me like Gene Wilder if he was given Botox and or tranquilizers. His shop probably has the most color that we see at one time in this whole film, and he also does magic tricks for her. When I first watched this film months ago and I had yet to realize that they were taking the Grimm story route pretty hard, I thought, oh, this is the perfect setup. He makes fancy shoes, he does magic, he is going to be the fairy godmother. Genius. But because it's the Grimm version and they don't do fairy godmothers here, that doesn't happen. And this character, who really stands out among the rest of the film, even though he's got about 3 minutes of screen time max, goes literally nowhere. I am mad. I am always a sucker for characters that are nice to Cinderella and make her smile, especially when some adaptations can make her seem really, really alone. Prince notwithstanding, you just want her to find somebody that she gets along with. And these doves are only doing so much for me. Back in the episode where I covered fairy tale theater, I went on and on about how much I enjoyed that fairy godmother because she genuinely cared about Cinderella. Even when your protagonist archetype is literally referred to as the persecuted heroine, I feel like you need at least some relief and have to see her happy for just a little while to help you realize that she's human. So yeah, I'm bitter about this, but I also feel like I'm at least bitter for decent reasons. Then there's the Jester character, which I am less enthused about. He's made out to be a friend for the prince and clearly the single comic relief character, always making odd faces and saying these weird little rhymes and poems. He's also played by an actor with dwarfism and dresses like Napoleon for some reason. I guess because it's funny, but it's really not. I won't go as far to say I don't know why he's here, because the prince does need someone to bounce off of, and he does serve a purpose. And I like the idea of having a Jester character, but this execution is just not scratching my itch. I obviously have no evidence, but I feel like this character suffers the most from the dub, and if I'd heard the original delivery, I might have a different opinion. I don't know.
A princess is hiding up in a pear tree. A fish in the woods.
The one part from him that I do like is this little speech that he goes on where he refers to the ladies at the ball like flowers and basically says that you can't judge their beauty against each other because they're all so different. I'll say it right here and now. This prince is dumb as rocks. His first dance with Cinderella, and only dance, I might add to my deep dismay, is incredibly short.
I would love to dance the entire night away.
So be it. We shall dance all night long.
I must go now.
But if he hadn't been so busy talking about how he compares the rest of the people there to different birds, they might have been able to actually have a real conversation. Despite that, he is still immediately head over heels for her, and this adaptation makes no attempt to explain the love at first sight trope. It just is what it is, and they run with it. Because after that incredibly short dance, and only that incredibly short dance, the next time he sees her, he's already determined that he's going to marry her.
I've been bewitched by you. Or is enchanted the word? I'm not certain.
Must you be certain?
Listen, I am a grade A sucker, and I don't need much to believe in a fairy tale romance, but you've at least got to give me a little more than that. And look at this. Look at this nonsense. When he follows her home, he looks her right in the eye. He doesn't even recognize her. Yet somehow he immediately recognizes her when he returns for the shoe fitting, when he almost rode off with both of her stepsisters. Yeah, girl, I'd climb a tree too if I had to put up with him. But at least the film improves upon the Grimm story and makes it clear that Cinderella is interested in him as well.
If you're quick as the wind, then I can go and see the prince.
And there is a small moment when she's watching in on the ball that first night where the prince turns around like something's caught his attention and she kind of shrinks away like maybe he can see her back. Maybe something in the magic did cause him to see a little glimpse of her. It would also explain why he says, "I knew you would come," when they meet in person the next night. Though I guess you could read it as a less ominous, "I've been waiting for a girl like you" kind of line. Now, if the prince is dumb as rocks, the father is even dumber than that. I'll say he's at least a little better than the way the Grimm brothers portrayed him. He does genuinely seem to love his daughter, but he also just doesn't question anything going on around him. The stepmother walks over him super frickin' easily, and he doesn't even bat an eye at the fact that Cinderella started sleeping in the kitchen for some reason. He does seem to go on business trips quite frequently, so most of the time the stepmother is free to force her around however she wants, but that just makes the time he is home all the weirder because nothing really changes. And I think after a point, Cinderella just starts to get disillusioned with him.
Is there any room left in the vase for my flowers?
No.
Though, since this film kind of bonks you over the head with the fact that Cinderella is a demeaning nickname, it was definitely a little unnerving to hear the dad refer to her that way during the pear tree incident. I didn't clock it in the Grimm's text because that father was already so unlikable.
Hurry up, cut it down.
I wonder if Cinderella's up there.
What did you say?
I'll do it.
That's a bit of a yikes.
Oh, listen to the doves. Cinderella is your true love.
Okay, who's ready to talk about visuals? Because I am. I'm not an expert by any means when it comes to historical fashion, but the clothes in this film seem to lean toward the mid-1800s with all of the ruffles, the hoop skirts, and the ridiculous hats. Each of the antagonists has a very strict color scheme. I immediately noticed that the older stepsister always wore orange and the younger always wore pink, but it took me a couple of viewings to realize that the stepmother always wears red as well. It's an interesting touch. The sisters are commonly color coordinated because they're obviously a pair, but it's not often that you see the stepmother get her own signature color. Not only does it make them seem more of a combined unit against Cinderella, but the red really helps to sell that the stepmother is an actual threat to her. She is dangerous. There's also a green light that they keep using around the stepmother. At first, it's a very obvious kind of theatrical effect, and it shows how Cinderella sees the other ladies in her mind, but there's other scenes where the green light is just there. It's not really called attention to, and it feels like it's just a regular part of the set, but it just happens to be green. Part of me thinks this might have been intentional, but another part of me thinks this might have just had something to do with budgeting. As for Cinderella herself, most of the time she's dressed in a plain gray smock, which is literally what's described in the Grimm's Tale, points for accuracy. But I would argue that the clothes she wears prior to her father getting remarried don't stand out enough to make it seem like a serious transition. She wears a lot of grays and muted blues. Now granted, she was mourning for a significant period of this, so who am I to judge? I'm not terribly impressed with her ball gowns either, or rather ball gown, because it's just the same dress in two different colors. Aside from it being shiny, it really doesn't feel like it has much pizzazz, and also her headpiece feels just a little bit understated. But I can at least appreciate, while the other girls at the ball are very done up and accessorized, Cinderella's look remains very simple, and just by that contrast, she stands out. A very Sandy Powell move 25 years early. I also noticed that the silhouette of the ball gown is pretty similar to the dress that her father brings her at the beginning, right before he drops the "you're gonna have a new mom" bombshell. So maybe that was intentional, and if so, good on the costume designers. And as much as I wish they had done something a bit different with the style for the ball, I guarantee that Cinderella's actress, Petrovigna, still gave some kids in the 90s some serious hair envy.
I do my hair toss, check my nails.
I've already been talking a lot, but I do want to talk at least a little bit more about Cinderella herself. Like I said, because I watched the dub, I don't really think it's fair to comment on the acting, but I do appreciate that the film shows a greater range of emotion for her than the Grimms did, because that makes a protagonist that is so much easier to root for. On top of being sad, she's witty, daydreamy, a little smug, and at certain points, haunted, I think, is the best way to describe her. To me, this is a Cinderella who absolutely could sick a wet team of doves against her enemies, but ultimately chooses not to because it's not worth it. So how do I feel about this film as a whole? It's still very much a TV movie, so expectations should be managed, and it's definitely not a sparkling masterpiece. But I didn't hate it either, and in the quiet slowness of the story, there's times where I even felt a strange sense of comfort. I doubt it will be one that I revisit much in the future, but I can still appreciate it for what it is. And with that, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it. You can support the video by giving it a like, and if you want to see me talk about other Cinderella things, there is a playlist on the end screen and also linked in the description. You can also subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see new episodes when they come out. Like I said, if you have any more information on this film, if there's something that I didn't cover, I would love to learn more, so be sure to leave a comment. Or you can tell me about a Cinderella thing that you think is very middle of the road so that we can discuss it for a future episode. Maybe I'll share your opinion, or maybe I'll disagree. We'll have to find out. But for now, I think I'm about to turn into a pumpkin, so I will see you next time. Bye!